Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all. It is our traditional Thursday evening gathering. And while people are joining us, and sometimes it takes a couple of minutes because everybody's now coming at the last moment on Zoom. I've noticed that, so we effectively can start a couple of minutes later. I just wanted to ask you to write a few things in the chat box about yourselves. We always read them. We're always interested in how did you know, how did you hear about these events, where you are in the world, what are you doing work-wise, why are you interested in this particular topic, have you been to this event before, have you done any SDS training before, with what trainers, sort of all sorts of information which you think might be helpful to us to know who you are and to introduce yourself to the group. And while you are typing, I want to share my screen and just say a couple of words about our website and things which we are offering to you very, very soon. So, that's the one. So as always, yeah, you can see, Paul, all right? Yeah, you can see my screen. Yes, as always, I always start from the front page, but I know there's quite a few people who are here for the first time and maybe not that familiar with SDS website. So on the front page, you can see the events which are coming up very soon. And you can see here on the 31st of March, we have a one-day, full-day seminar, workshop, masterclass with Dr. Andrew Beck on how to prevent therapist burnout. And also the same event is advertised as a featured course. So today there will be just a little taster. Yeah, both ways can work actually, yes, with Andrew. But if you want to have the full training, which is particularly important for those people who are involved in supervision or managing the teams, so that will be a must. So 31st of March, and I deliberately kept early bird booking discount until tomorrow, because I know lots of people, we're just creating our own habits now. So lots of people want to attend Thursday before they book the event, right? Because they want to meet the trainer. Although probably most of you know Andrew Beck, because Andrew's been really helpful and participated in our Thursdays from the very, very beginning. So 31st of March, you click here and you book the event, and you can see early bird price is still available, but expiring tomorrow, 19th of March. So please, please do that. So now I think I'll stop sharing and I will take over the waiting room, Paul, and my colleague and co-director, Paul Grantham, will talk about our speaker a little more. Paul.
Okay, thanks very much, Julia. Welcome, folks. This evening, we have Dr. Andrew Beck, who is a consultant clinical psychologist based up in, I think, the Burnley area and in the Northwest. And Andrew and SDS have had a collaboration now for, I think, a couple of years, really. And Andrew's background is in primarily clinically in working with children and adolescents and in terms of services connected with that. But he's also done quite a lot of work on stress that is experienced basically by therapists. And that is what his particular masterclass is on. And he looks at a whole range of areas, which I'll be honest with you, I don't think that I have seen being addressed in quite this particular way anywhere else. So he asks some questions that are frequently just not looked at within burnout, such as how do we differentiate between burnout and depression and anxiety, and what sort of elements can actually be handled within supervision, and so on and so forth. and what's the distinction between providing support as a supervisor or as a manager, and the instances when practitioners who are experiencing particular difficulties need to go and source personal therapy as a result. So a whole range of issues. And Andrew's run this particular course before, and very, very popular indeed, which is why we've had him back again. And he's going to give you a sample of what he's going to be outlining in much more detail on that particular day, which is at the end of this month, folks. I will pop into the chat box a URL so you can see that if you didn't catch what it was that Julia said to you. But from this point onwards, I just wanted to hand you over to Andrew for what I know is going to be a really interesting presentation. So thanks very much, Andrew. It's over to you. Oh, can't hear you.
That's the second time in 10 minutes I've been on mute. That's quite good, terrible going. Julia, I wanted to just pick up something that you've said, and thanks for that lovely introduction, Paul. But Julia, you talked about me sort of talking about things here on these Thursday evenings, but I've also been coming along to them as a participant as well. And one of the reasons I've really valued them this year is because of that great sense of isolation I've felt as a therapist. Even though I work in a busy team and I'm involved in various networks, probably like a lot of you, I've found that most of the therapy I've been providing this year and the supervision has been done from home. And so that sense of community that you'd get in your workplace, in the therapy practice that you go to, on the training courses, sitting in a room with your colleagues has been harder to find. And I've really appreciated these Thursdays as something that's been really sustaining to remind me that I am part of a community of therapists, and that we can, you know, it's not so easy to be in touch with each other on a platform like this, but we can still do that. And I've really enjoyed these Thursday evenings, and enjoyed the way that the chat function has really helped people connect and think about what's going on in their lives as therapists, and it's been really sustaining, and I've appreciated that. So thank you both for providing this for us. So as Paul said, I talk about therapists and looking after therapists from probably a different perspective to other people who run these courses, thinking about therapist wellbeing and burnout. And I think the reason for that, or one of the reasons, is that quite a long time ago now, probably 10 years back, I experienced burnout as a therapist myself. And because I'm trained as a scientist practitioner, as part of my coming back from burnout, I made sure that I understood burnout as well as I possibly could. So looked at the research literature on it, thought about how you could apply that in a mental health setting, and set out to become the sort of supervisor and manager that would have a protective play a protective role in the people that I had responsibility for, to ensure that I reduced their burnout risk as much as possible, but also thought about that for myself as well. So I kind of came at this both from an experiential point of view, having been through it, but also from a kind of bottom-up determination to look at the research literature that was out there and see what of it was going to be helpful in my own practice and in the services that I had a leadership role within. So that's how I came to that, really, and why I'm so passionate about getting a chance to talk about this. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what this field encompasses, and then have an opportunity at the end to take any questions from you all who might want to know a little bit more about it, or might want to pick me up on some of the ideas that I present. So the day that I'm doing with SDS next week, the kind of overarching title of it is how we can improve the way that staff engage with their work and reduce the chance that they'll experience burnout. And I take a really firm position on this, in that I don't think it's something that we can expect staff to take responsibility for themselves. I think it's something that as supervisors and as managers or leaders within our services, we need to take responsibility for creating the right environment. And I suppose it's a little bit like how we think about child rearing, really. You don't expect a child to take responsibility for their own development and well-being. That's the job of the adults in their life. And I'm not saying this in a way that kind of disempowers therapists, but I think those people who have seniority and a kind of role in shaping the culture of organizations need to take the responsibility for developing an environment that's good for people's well-being, just in the same way that the adults around a child, whether that's the teachers, the health professionals, the parents, the other relatives, take that responsibility for creating that environment too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about burnout and engagement, and then just give a kind of very quick overview of what that's going to look like on the day. And I think it's a day that'll be useful for those of you who are supervisors or who do have a leadership role, but also I think will give those of you in independent practice something to take away in terms of how you might work with organizations and work into organizations to help them do better, and to kind of give you a framework for you to help others to bring about culture change. So right, let me get on with that a little bit. Now, you know, this kind of often happens with me and Zoom. The first time I screen share and then go to move through the slides, it kind of gets stuck a little bit. So I'm just going to see how that goes. Yep, it's moving again. So what's really important as a therapist is our ability to be emotionally and cognitively, intellectually in the moment with the patients that we're working with. And that's true whatever your therapy model is, and whatever the client group you're working with. So we have to be highly engaged with the job that we're doing. And there's a huge research literature being developed over the past 10 years or so about what engagement is and how we can conceptualize it with kind of psychological clarity. So this definition of engagement comes from Maslach's work, who some of you will be familiar with. So he defines engagement with our jobs as a work-related state that's denoted by a positive emotional attachment to the work. So it's something, engagement's about how we do our jobs, and it's about having that really warm, caring, involved attachment with the work that we do. And Maslach talks about three key components to engagement. Talks about vigor. So that's the level of mental and physical fortitude and energy we have during the day. So that kind of get up and go that we have about our jobs, about the work that we do. It talks about dedication. So this is the sense of significance we have about our work, that we believe that our work is important and makes a difference, and we're enthusiastic about what we do. And then absorption. So this is our ability to fully concentrate on and be engrossed in the work that we do. And if those three things are in place, that allows us to be very present, very involved, and very real as a therapist. And we know that, again, whatever your therapeutic orientation is, that quality of engagement with the work, engagement with the patient, enhances the therapeutic relationship, and that plays a really big part in the therapeutic outcomes. So this is kind of key stuff, really, as therapists, that we need to be getting right. So given this definition of engagement, I want you to take a minute and just reflect on what your engagement levels have been like this week. So we're Thursday, we're 4 days into the week. And I want you to just think about what it's been like sitting on Zoom or sitting in a room with patients doing that therapy. And just score out of 10 how engaged you've been with your job this week. If you want to share that in the chat, you're really welcome to. Because I think sometimes it's kind of really helpful when you think, yeah, oh, and this is where 10 is the best it could be, when you've had a 4 out of 10 week, to see that you're not the only one, or that there is a big variance in how we engage with our jobs at any one time. And then I'd like you to think, okay, so if I was X out of 10 this week, what do I think I was like a year ago before the pandemic came? What was my engagement as a therapist like then? Again, just to take a moment to reflect on that. And then think about what the week before this was like. So how engaged were you last week compared to this? Has it changed? If it has, you might want to speculate on why that might be the case. There can be lots of different reasons why our engagement fluctuates. Just take a minute. I mean, I think it's fair to say our engagement fluctuates on a moment by moment basis sometimes when we're sitting in therapy. It can kind of go up and down during that therapeutic 50 minutes. It can certainly vary during a week, working week, and can vary quite a lot over time. But there are things that we can do to ensure that ourselves as therapists and the people we have responsibility for are as engaged as possible, as much of the time as possible. Okay, so there's been a lot of anecdotal discussion over the past, well, nearly the past year now, about how therapists are doing during the pandemic. So we know some of you are working in NHS settings, and we know when we look at the data that's available within statutory services, actually people are seeing slightly more people than they were this time last year, and the outcomes of patients are slightly better. And that's over the past 8 months or so. First 4 months of the pandemic, contact rates went down, outcomes went down a little bit, but as therapists adapted, as services adapted, as patients adapted to the new ways of doing things, we found actually people are doing more work. There's some pros and cons around that I'm going to pick up on in a minute. And when you talk to independent providers, it's been really interesting hearing about how the pandemic has impacted on them. Some have found that there was a drop-off in work initially, if they were people who worked in the room predominantly, that then picked up again. And now I'm hearing, talking to independent practitioners, that in fact demand's increased quite a bit. So it's been a really variable year. But I think it's fair to say that therapists have paid a bit of a price for this year in the pandemic. And I think all of us have nationally. Okay, it's been a tough year. There's lots of things that we've lost, as well as had some gains, lots of challenges, lots of quick changes to the way that we work. And so I just wanted to have a little think with you this evening about in general what burnout and engagement look like, and in particular what it's looked like over the past 12 months and how it may look like going forward as things kind of change again. We do know on the whole, people are working more now than they were a year ago. So we're getting more emails sent to us. Emails are copied into more people. More people are emailing after business hours. So there's that kind of constant stream of communication we have to deal with. And on average, people are working 48 minutes a day longer. So this is the commute time that a lot of us are saving. Is not being spent on quality time with activities or people that we care about. It's been spent working, whether that's paid work or not. And because we know that there's some really good research from the Health and Care Women Leaders Network at the end of last year that demonstrated what probably all of us knew anyway, which is the new challenges that families face, both in terms of homeschooling kids, taking care of elderly or shielding relatives, neighbours and community members, has fallen disproportionately on women. And on average, women are spending an additional 11 hours a week caring for others. It's significantly more than men are, with no proportional reduction in working time. And if anything, people are working a little bit more. So where's this time coming from that people, and predominantly women, are spending on their additional care and responsibilities? It's not out of their work time. It's out of the time you might recuperate and take care of yourself. And we also know from several sources, including this one, that women from ethnic minority backgrounds are particularly impacted by the pandemic in terms of their the expectations on them from care and responsibilities, being in communities with higher rates of mortality from COVID, higher infection rates, greater economic impact. So the pandemic has exacerbated a whole load of existing inequalities effectively, and our workforce within the mental health sector is predominantly female. So this is something that impacts on all of us and on the workforces that we're a part of. So how are mental health staff managing? Well, there was a nice paper very recently, the end of 2020, from Sonia Johnson and her colleagues. So Professor Johnson's based in London, she did outstanding work, who asked mental health staff how they were doing. And they talked about how their kind of networks were important sources of support during difficult times during this pandemic, that their employers, their colleagues and their managers had been key to getting through this as best as possible. And I'm going to be spending time, when we have the full day to think about this, looking at what colleagues and managers and supervisors can do to support staff as best they can. But also said they've been really inspired by how well service users had coped in extraordinarily difficult times. And I thought this was a lovely finding that we kind of think in the helping professions that the help is one way, that we're kind of helping patients. But in fact, what mental health staff are saying is seeing how our patients, service users, clients are managing this extraordinary time has been inspiring and helpful for the therapists. Also, mental health staff talked about how inspired they'd been by the practical things that their teams had done and how that had sustained them and inspired them. And also that services were expanding the support for staff, sometimes quite significantly, including things like in inpatient settings, wards setting up wobble rooms. So these were quiet rooms where staff who were feeling overwhelmed could just go and let it all go for a moment, that there were more staff helplines, that people had increased the amount of supervision they were offering, that they were just people who were working in isolation were getting wellness check-ins, and that staff had developed their own informal support networks, and that had been really, really helpful. And staff were really positive about flexible working and how this had really helped maintain their productivity, and brought about more flexible workplaces. I don't know if you've all been in the same situation, but for years, services had resisted the idea of working from home, resisted the idea of remote therapy provision, resisted the idea of you being able to access electronic records on patients from your house. And suddenly, and almost overnight, all that was possible. And this flexibility has led to agility often, and for the better in terms of patient care, ultimately, because a more flexible service is one that can meet the needs of service users better. And a lot of staff reported this flexibility, this enhanced support, improved their productivity, improved their efficiency and their well-being. So there's clearly, I think, stuff that we've done really well this year that hopefully won't be lost as we approach an end to restrictions in June, and that a lot of these positives will be kept, really, and for the better in terms of both staff and patient well-being. However, and there's a really big however from me, and that's about what it's like sitting at home hearing incredibly tough stories from patients, because quite often the people that we work with have experienced physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and extraordinarily tough lives. Now, when you're in a therapy room, you kind of hear all that in an environment that's kind of got a boundary around it. And that kind of holds you a little bit as a therapist. And then you leave that therapy room and you're in your workplace, and then you travel home. And that kind of process of leaving those places and traveling home creates a really clear distance between you and the traumatic histories that you're hearing. But even in those circumstances, therapists still suffer from vicarious trauma and can experience PTSD-like symptoms. Now, those of you who've been supervising people this year, or those of you who've been working from home yourself, some of you will be aware of the fact that suddenly you or the therapists you work with are hearing those stories in their kid's bedroom, because that's the only place they can get the peace and quiet to do therapy from, or sitting in their own bedroom, or sitting in the family living room. And I think suddenly hearing those traumatic stories in an intimate family space has increased the risk of vicarious trauma in therapists. So I'm going to talk a bit on the day about how we can help with that too. And of course, another thing I want to recognize is that I'm in my 50s. I'm lucky enough that at this point in my career, I can afford a house that's got an extra room. So I've been able to do therapy in a room that isn't an intimate family room. It was a kind of dumping ground for just about everything that people had grown out of or were fed up of, but managed to make it into a therapy room. But junior staff and people at the start of their career aren't paid so well, maybe got younger families, are less likely to have that space to turn into a therapy room. So more likely to be doing it from intimate spaces. And the more junior staff are, the research literature shows, the more likely they are to experience vicarious trauma anyway. So we've really got to think about looking after junior staff going forward, when more of them will be doing therapy from home because of these blended services that are emerging. So I just wanted to recognise that really as a potential pressure. Now I'm aware I've not got a ton more time, but I'm going to just talk about a few other things. I like this quote, and it forms a basis for a lot of my thinking, really. This is from James Patterson, who was a CEO of a kind of big blue chip company in the States. And he talked about life as having kind of five, like you were a juggler, juggling 5 balls. And these are work, family, health, friends, and integrity. And what Patterson says is, if you think about these 5 balls and you're juggling them and it's getting difficult, if you drop work, then work is like it's a rubber ball. It'll bounce, you can catch it, it'll be okay. But the other ones, your family, your health, your friends, your integrity, are much more vulnerable. They're like glass balls. And if you drop them, they can crack or shatter. And I think it's really important when we think about ourselves and colleagues who may be at risk of burning out and being overwhelmed in their jobs, that the price for this, from a service point of view, because one of the things we'll all worry about is what's going to happen to the patients, what's going to happen to their caseloads. But actually, realistically, we can manage that in services. We can absorb, we can plan, we can do things. What's really important is remembering that those therapists we have responsibility for have families, have their own health struggles, have their real life, and have a sense of integrity. And we've got to work to make sure that the job that they're doing doesn't impact negatively and in the long term on those things. And I think we can set up services that do that. But most importantly, I think as supervisors, we can be supervisors that provide the kind of supervision that mitigates against that, and provide the kind of supervision that actually grows our supervisees' ability to manage the struggles that they face, and also then shapes the service culture to make it a service and an environment that's better for people's well-being. Just going to talk a little bit and then take some questions. If you do come along on the day, be prepared And it's be prepared for a day that's not a didactic day where I'm going to teach you some stuff and you'll go away and just be able to use it. It's going to be a day when you're going to sit and think about you as a therapist, you as a supervisor, you as a senior member of your team, and recognize the patterns that you might play out in yourself, in your supervision, in your job, and also to sort of identify how that might then impact on the people you have responsibility for. Because I think as people in more senior positions, whether that's as therapists or supervisors, we've got to get good at this. We've got to get good at pausing and thinking about what we're doing and why we're doing it. Because how we do at work, our well-being and the well-being of people we're responsible for, depends on both what's going on in the systems that we work within, but also how we respond to those systems. And we may feel that we have limited abilities to shape the systems that we're working within, although all of us have some ability to shape our environments, but we certainly have a lot of control in the way that we respond to those systems. So I'm going to kind of get you to do reflection, get you to think about how these things play out for you in your workplaces and what you can do differently. So yeah, I talked about engagement. I'm going to talk a little bit about how that fits with the idea of burnout, and then I'm going to finish. So engagement had these three factors that I've already mentioned: vigor, dedication, and absorption. Burnout can be thought of as existing at the other end of the spectrum, the emotional spectrum, because burnout involves emotional exhaustion. So that kind of feeling of being tired in your job all the time, and then that spills out to your home life.
Oh my God, so loud.
Yeah, someone unmuted then quite dramatically. That's all right. It's the kind of thing that happens all the time when we're in big groups. So there's emotional exhaustion. There's depersonalization. So this is the way that as therapists sitting in a room, we might begin to feel disengaged or detached from the work, or begin to have a sense of cynicism about the pointlessness of what we're doing, or a degree of indifference about the therapeutic work that we're providing. And also a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. So feeling like we never succeed, we never finish anything, nothing ever kind of works out. And when this sets in a therapist, it can have a huge impact on their ability to do therapy in the room, but then can spill out and have a really pervasive impact on the rest of their life as well. Now, I just want to finish by mentioning stress, because some stress at work isn't necessarily a bad thing. Okay, we all need a little bit of stress to energize us and engage us. And that's kind of useful, but when the degree of stress that we're experiencing becomes too much, then we can become overwhelmed and it can have a negative impact on our ability to do our jobs. And the health and safety executives for the HSE provide a really nice definition of stress at work. And they talk about how it's not just about what's going on, it's about what we think about what's going on. It's a very kind of cognitive approach to stress, really, that it's not just the outside world, it's our thoughts about the outside world and how we, what we believe about it. So stress is an interaction between a person and an environment, and you need to get, as I say, a little bit can be really useful, but too much it can be really damaging to staff in our services and to ourselves. So we need a degree of challenge at times to feel satisfaction, and people generally feel at their best when they've had a challenge and overcome it, whether that's as a therapist, a supervisor, someone who's developing a service. And then when we have these positive emotions, we're able to act more effectively and give us a sense of coping with the challenges that we face. And we do know that if you introduce these ideas around that underpin CBT, for example, to health staff who aren't mental health professionals, it reduces burnout and increases their engagement because it teaches them to recognize their own thinking styles, how they respond to challenges, what that might mean, what that might do. So giving people that self-awareness in and of itself can be really useful. So that's one of the reasons why I think if we're going to spend some time thinking about this, we've got to build in some self-practice and self-reflection for ourselves and also for the people that we supervise. So I'm just going to finish by talking about the full day, what it's going to look like. As I say, it's not an easy day. There's a lot of thinking involved. I'll be doing some role play of situations that you might be in as supervisors to give you some experiential learning. So the part one, which takes up probably 2/3 of the day, is about what goes on in supervision. So how we can, as supervisors or line managers, create a setting, a culture, and a framework to really enhance and support the people that we supervise or have other responsibilities for. And in the afternoon, and that's quite experiential the morning, then towards the end of the day when people are getting quite tired, I look at more organizational factors. That's a little bit more didactic. There are several points where I'm going to get you to stop and think and look at what you're going to do differently as a result of these ideas. But it is a little bit more easygoing in the last third, having kind of worked you quite hard for the first 2/3. So that's what the full day looks like. But I hope even those of you who don't make it will be able to take away something from this evening, if it's just a reflection on your own engagement levels and how they might change and what that might be about. So so that's the end of the presentation bit, but I'm really happy to take some questions. So there's a question from Sue. Is the course specifically for supervisors or line managers? I think it's geared for people who have a position of responsibility for others. So that might be for people who are a senior member of their team or who have a supervisory or line management role. But it could also be for people who are working into organizations. So for example, if you were an independent practitioner who'd been asked to work with a business or a school or a college to help them think about staff well-being, this would also be a really good day for you and give you some really solid frameworks for doing that.
I know that Paul was keeping an eye on the chat box because the questions go up so quickly. Paul, did you pick up anything? You need to unmute yourself as well, Paul.
Yes, I have got a note of that, but you know we've also got 2 people here with their hands raised.
That is so wonderful. I love seeing people with their hands raised.
I do as well. I thought we would take them first, actually.
Yes, let's go. Oh, they disappear. The person who has their hand raised, I don't know your name. Can you?
Wiley?
Yes.
Hi. Yes, my name's Sarah. Hi.
Oh, Sarah.
Hi.
Hi, Andrew. I just wanted to ask you, what helped you when you were in the situation where you identified that you were experiencing burnout?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
I just think, do you have any advice?
Yeah, I think for me the most important thing was to name it, because I think it's easy to personalize what's going on, to think that it's kind of your fault, you're just not trying hard enough, you're just not working hard enough. And I think when I sat back and sort of took a look at the literature and thought, actually, this is not something that's about me just needing to, you know, pull my socks up or do things differently. It's something about what's going on in my organization, how I'm supported to do this job, and things that are external factors that kind of aren't my fault. And that's not to say I took no responsibility for what had happened, but beginning to formulate the organizational processes that were causing the problem, and then thinking about which of those I could change and which of those I was likely stuck with, and then coming up with a plan to improve my working environment was a really good start. And then also just thinking about then what did I need to do to improve my own looking after myself. And that involved things like changing supervisors, so getting a supervisor who sort of understood the degree to which organizational factors were impacting on me, to speak to management to try and change some of the aspects of the job. And I think largely recovery for me was about making some changes at an organizational level. Yeah, Teresa's nice point. A bit like the responsibility pie chart. It absolutely is like that. That's a really lovely point. So yeah, it was something about seeing what I could shift organizationally, but I think just naming it, understanding it, and then seeking supervision that would help me recover. Yeah, and I did, and that's the lovely thing, right? Once you've named it and figured it out, I think recovery is absolutely possible. And it's not quick, but I think it's a for me, it was a really helpful process. It made me a better supervisor, and yeah, I took things from that really tough situation, I think. But it took a while, you know, it took a while. I hope that's a useful answer, Sue.
Okay, I know that Frances has got her hand raised as well. If you want to unmute yourself, Frances, and fire away.
Thank you very much. So before COVID, there was a lot of emphasis on training in resilience, which seems to have sort of disappeared actually during COVID. During COVID, interestingly, there's much more, it seems to me, much more focus on, as you said, management provision, thinking about organize what the organizational what organizations should be doing rather than the individual. And I just wondered if you had any commentary on that, and particularly this idea of promoting resilience.
I do, Francis, but I'm really aware it's one of those topics I'm terribly outspoken about.
Right, great. That sounds good.
Yeah, I'm just kind of worried about how outspoken I ought to be. But anyway, if you bear with me, I suppose if you were working in a school and there was a kid in that school in a really awful, emotionally abusive, invalidating family, the first thing you do would not be to teach that kid how to be resilient in that environment. You know, you get the parents in and you think about working with the parents to help them to change how they parented their kid. And if they weren't able to make those changes and it was genuinely damaging to the kid, then you'd look at safeguarding options, wouldn't you? And I suppose my response to resilience training is a little bit like that, in that I think, why teach our schools and mental health staff to be resilient to awful environments? Why not just make environments to work in that aren't awful? So yeah, I suppose I'm a little bit critical of resilience training, even though I know plenty of good people who've been on resilience training and come back saying they've took a lot out of it, in terms of thinking about how to take care of themselves. So I'm not, not wholly against it, but I think by far the best solution is to create better environments. How did that sound on the outrageous ometer? Was that kind of within acceptable?
Yeah, that's well within limits for SDS.
Phew.
Thank you.
Can I jump in for a moment, because there were a couple of questions which are more organizational. The first one about the slides. We are not providing you with the slides, but I am always doing an edited version of recording. I only edit out our chat in the beginning and things like that. So you will have access to recording on SDS website. Again, it's in the news and it's called Free Materials Videos. And the second thing is whether Andrew will be running it again in 2022. I genuinely can't promise anything at the moment. So if you would like to be on this training, but for whatever reason you can't come, or the other option is to book it and to watch it later as a recording. Obviously, you will have to miss out on experiential part of it, but that's the only thing we can guarantee right now. But what we would love to see Andrew in 2022, but we haven't started planning for that year yet. So that's all I can say on that. And the early bird discount expires tonight at midnight, because that's how our website treats the date. So as soon as the date's on, it expires. So if you want to come, book and come to the training on the 31st. It's Wednesday from 9:30 to 4:30 on Wednesday, the 31st of March. Unfortunately, our time is up. We won't be able to take any more questions, but I think we more or less answered all of them. And there was a nice discussion also in the chat. So thank you very much. I just want to let you know that we'll take a slightly longer break now because of Easter holiday. And we will be meeting again on the 15th of April. And Paul will introduce us to a brand new BPS approved certificate of working with non-diagnostic categories with emotional problems or life challenges which don't meet diagnostic categories. So the first one will be in June, 4th of June, and we did a little bit of a survey on our in our Facebook group. Group on Therapist Toolkit, and the top of the list, we were very surprised with that, but top of the list amongst those non-diagnostic challenges which we presented came imposter syndrome. So Paul will start with imposter syndrome. So, and he will talk more about this certificate and specifically about his first module on the 15th of April. So we'll see you then. You have a good Easter, and probably we'll see you before at our courses, specifically on the 31st of March with Andrew. Thank you, Andrew, very much. And thank you everyone for being here. You can unmute yourself and say goodbye and thanks. That'll be lovely to hear you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Bye.
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 My favorite part.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.